Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. If you decide to get your education from the white media, then you would think that the single most important event of the last 500 years would have been the Second World War. They certainly spend enough time talking about it. On the other hand, if you're black first, you look at the world from our point of view. And that being the case, you would look at the last 500 years and the single most important event would be the Pan African revolutions that took place in the 20th century. Africa has been under siege at least since the time of Kemet's zenith. That being the case, there had been no substantive pushback against this invasion and the subsequent inhumanity that we had suffered, nothing truly substantive, nothing that said this far and no farther. Well, that is except for the Moors. When they went northward into southern Europe, that certainly established a real bulwark, brought the first taste of civilization the European had ever had. But when the Moorish alliance with the Arabs fell apart and the Moors went back into Africa, that was pretty much the beginning of the resurgence of the European. Next thing you know, the Europeans decided that they were going to try to come southward. It wasn't easy at first. The African had always been a better soldier, better organized, at least when it came to combat. The European certainly has no high marks when it comes to his courage or his fighting tactics. But it wasn't the European responsible for the total conquest of Africa and the subsequent barbarity that ensued. It was actually the Asians who were responsible, indirectly. They were the ones who created gunpowder, and when the European went east looking for something to eat, he couldn't get into Africa, so he had to go into Asia. He had nowhere else to go. He was able to get not just spices and food, such as apples and oranges. These are Asiatic fruits, by the way. But he was also able to get gunpowder. And that made the difference. The European no longer had to fight. He could use a technical innovation. And he did. And so the European would no longer have to fight to enslave people. He could allow his black powder to do it for him. And in the late 15th century, the greatest single Holocaust in human history, the greatest single tragedy ever to befall mankind, began. The Europeans' genocidal march across Africa and later America. Those who the European did not kill outright, he enslaved, either where they stood in Africa and the Americas, or he put them on a boat and dragged them over to the United States. But apparently a few black folks decided enough was enough. And in the early 19th century, the fires of freedom began burning in Haiti. Sure, there had been a number of uprisings and revolts that had taken place before Haiti and since, but Haiti was the first one that had been completely and thoroughly successful. A total overthrow of white power. And regardless of how Haiti's own children would later go on to abandon the revolution, it doesn't change the fact that that's where it started. The first successful blow against white supremacy started there. But it wouldn't be the last. In the United States, where white supremacy has had its tightest grip, the uprisings, which have been going on for a long time, became more frequent and far more violent, ultimately culminating in the Civil War, in which you had the former slaves taking up arms against the slave masters. And so chattel slavery, at least as it existed in the United States, came to an end, though it was written into law that the federal government reserves the right to lock up and enslave any black people that they choose. In the 20th century, however, all of Africa began to go into revolt against European imperialism. Now, over here in the United States, it didn't matter what particular tribe your people came from in Africa, or what particular ethnic group they were part of here in the United States. The European saw you, he threw you in chains, threw you all together, and that was that. The European also made it very clear that it's white versus black. Sure, the European would occasionally have their little internal spats, but when push came to shove, they reminded everybody, hey, we're all white. We all come from Europe, and that makes us pretty much the same team as long as we're against these black people. And what that did was it clarified for us we couldn't play any tribalism games. There couldn't be any factionalism along ethnic lines amongst us. This gave us the ability to unite in a way that these other African groups could not. Sure, you had people in the Caribbean, but the people in the Caribbean thought of themselves as British subjects. Or they thought of themselves as Francophiles, or thought of themselves as basically Spanish expatriates of some sort. They were just a step away from whiteness, or at least that's what they thought. But these savages that we had to deal with over here in the hells of North America, they made it very clear. We were never going to be white. We would never be considered white. We were black. That made us subhuman, and that was drilled into us savagely for 500 years. The result was we've had no illusions about the idea that we're somehow just a lower branch on the tree of whiteness. That, well, if you had somebody in the family tree who was raped by Massa, well, that basically means you're part of the family. We had no illusions about that. They made it very clear. Nothing is going to change the fact that you're black. Nothing will change the enmity and hatred towards you. That gave us clarity. And so when we saw the uprisings and the overthrow of colonization, at least colonization as it had been known in Africa in the 20th century, black people in the United States started taking the logical common sense step. It is time for all of the children of Africa, wherever they are in the world, to unite. Marcus Garvey was not the first person to express the idea of Pan Africanism, though he certainly took it farther than anyone else. He definitely did the most to help popularize it. He was an evangelist for the idea that all the children of Africa, wherever they may be on the planet, must come together. He was the one who accurately predicted that the European, seeing all of this discontent among the black world, would attempt to reinforce his primary headquarters of white supremacy, the United States, by bringing in massive groups of Europeans in order to bolster white numbers, and he was absolutely right. And when the numbers of Europeans began to run low, they started bringing in people from Asia and people from south of the border, anything but black, and bestowing a de facto honorary whiteness on these groups, which these groups have been beating their chest about ever since. Meanwhile, among the foundational black Americans / descendants of American slaves, what were we doing? What we were doing was we were attempting to get everybody on the same page. And so we had a number of our grandmaster teachers, from Dr. John Henrik Clarke to Dr. Runoko Rashidi, among many others, preaching the gospel of Pan Africanism. The only reason that the European was able to get his hooks into Africa in the first place, the only reason he was able to carry out the unparalleled barbarity and savagery that he did, was because we were not united. Tribalism has always been our Achilles heel. And it was time for us to stop that nonsense, but apparently in Africa they weren't quite through with it yet and still aren't today. You see, when the European Jews underwent a Holocaust, they didn't react by deciding that they were going to go back to the same old tribalism and factionalism. What happened was a group of them had an idea that two things need to happen. First, they need to have some real estate that they could call their own. And second of all, there was going to be the idea that Jews are all they've got. And that being the case, you're going to have to be united whether you want to or not. The ideological foundation of Israel is the right of return. The idea that that piece of real estate belongs to all Jews on all the planet wherever they are. It is to tell them that you have a place of your own, but more importantly, this is a place that wants you. It's a powerful idea. And it certainly took hold. Even people who disagree with Israel's tactics, with Israel's policies, people like Dr. Noam Chomsky, they happen to have dual citizenship in Israel. Regardless of whatever criticism they may give, it didn't stop them from saying, I want to be an Israeli citizen. That didn't stop them from doing that. And it didn't stop the Israelis from accepting them. So the European Jews' response to a Holocaust was to unite. What was the Africans' response? Well, the Africans' response has been to go back to the same old tribalism. I guess they figured once they got the Europeans off their backs, at least in terms of having the European coming in and just taking land, now that the European owns all the choice cuts, there would be no attempt to force him to give them up. No matter how the white media tried to report on it, it's become obviously, excruciatingly clear that the overthrows of the European colonization were nothing of the sort. All that actually happened was the Africans simply made it clear we'd like a less brutal form of oppression, if you would. And the European was willing to back off a little bit as long as the African did not take back any of his ill-gotten gains. And indeed, they have not. The African has found it very easy to unite against one another, but he's found it impossible to get a full head of steam to decide that he's going to be taking back what's his and making sure that those who stole it are punished. In fact, they even threw open the door. In the last 25 years, they're allowing Asia in. But the people who they made it a point that they were not going to allow in was us. European Jewry responded to the Holocaust with a call for unity and a right of return to bring those people together under one roof. We are the ones who have the most need for something of that nature, and we are also the ones who face the most opposition to it, from the very countries and peoples who need it and would benefit from it the most. We tried to push the policy of Pan Africanism. We tried. For 100 years we tried. But it takes two to tango, and when we realized that we were dancing alone, we at long last decided to stop banging our heads against a wall. And what a surprise. We've noticed that there's been an attitude adjustment of late. Oh no, nothing major, by the way. But it's starting. Because what had happened is, we did something that neither the Haitians nor anyone else in the African diaspora had ever done. What we did was we made it very clear that we were proud to be black and we weren't backing down from that. We were not simply trying to figure out some way to get the European to be nicer to us because we had some delusion that we would somehow become an outpost of Europe. We didn't have some idea that we were going to ingratiate ourselves with our former slave masters. However dysfunctional and disjointed it may be, the actual idea of black empowerment was not born in Haiti. It wasn't born with Marcus Garvey. It was born right here with us. We are the only example of proud, unapologetic blackness on the planet. We are a unique people, a peculiar people, if you will, and that's a good thing. We stand out. We should. We're different. We ain't built like those other folks. And that's a good thing. We have been the standard bearers of what it means to be black in the best sense of the term. We don't even have a country of our own. We have no governments of our own. We're right here in the belly of the beast. And yet when people think of what it means to be black, when they look at the things that they copy and the things that they emulate, it comes almost exclusively from us. It is a very unique and powerful people who are able to do that. But we have leveraged our strength on the behalf of everybody else except for ourselves. We've done it on the behalf of the European by force. And then we chose to try to leverage our strength for the African diaspora, but they did not reciprocate. They made it clear that they rejected us. And so now a number of us are getting the idea that maybe it's time to leverage our strength for ourselves and ourselves alone. And that's how it should be. This is not about selfishness. This is about self-sufficiency and not making any apologies for it. If Africa has decided that they are more interested in seeing if they can get some Asiatic investors, that's fine. This is history repeating itself. The Cometans made the mistake of deciding that maybe there could be some sort of trade with the Asiatic, and before it was all over, the Asians started overrunning the place. You would have thought that after the Hyksos invasion, the Egyptians would have had that seared into their national memory, but apparently for some of them, it didn't take. Respect is a two-way street. But the thing to remember is, respect may not be given, but respect can be demanded. It can be required. And so that's what we're doing. The African world has by and large chosen to commit collective suicide. That's what's going on in Africa right now at the moment. And just like in Haiti, what you see is that the children of European imperialism, they are not deciding to stand against invasion. Instead, they're trying to run for the exits, and all the while telling the rest of the world how smart they are and what they've done. But that's all just empty boasting, and everybody can see that. What it means is these guys will be no threat to white supremacy. That's what people can clearly see. Well, that's not us. When it comes to white supremacy, we are all about maximum threat to white supremacy. Oh yeah, they got a bullseye painted on our backs, and that being the case, the main problem that we've had is we haven't been fighting back until now. We have not made it our policy that we are going to be putting up maximum resistance. Forget about we shall overcome, we will overrun. Thank you, Brother Khalid Muhammad. One of the issues that's always come out of Pan Africanism, at least at the way that we attempted to do it, at the time that we attempted to do it, it always smelled like a lack of self-esteem. Trying to say that we are great because we're connected to. Greatness starts within. It starts with yourself. It doesn't start because of who you're connected to. It starts because of what you've done, what you have created, what you are. So Pan-Africanism is dead. And it was the Africans who killed it. The Africans and the Caribbeans, they were the ones who murdered it. We spent decades trying to resuscitate it, but we kept getting stabbed in the back and in the throat ourselves, and now we've decided that we got to heal our own wounds that we've sustained at their hands and try to make sure we stand ourselves back on our feet. And we're going to be doing this for ourselves alone. This is not a matter of we're going to set an example for black people all over the world. They're going to see what we're doing and they're going to follow our... No, it doesn't matter if they do or if they don't. They have had every chance that there is to get with the program. What they've shown is they think that they're better than us. Great, let them prove it. As they beg other people from other places, other people who are not black, to rule over them. As they put up no resistance to their own re-enslavement, they are going to be recolonized and re-enslaved right where they stand. Hell, in many cases, the enslavement never stopped. The good book says that charity begins at home and then spreads abroad. Well, the thing is, we've been real stingy with the charity here at home. We've instead decided that we're going to be taking our riches and trying to use them to enrich everybody else. And the only thing that's happened is they've gotten better and we've gotten worse. They've gotten richer and we've gotten poorer. Not all of those wounds were because of the stabs in the back from these other people. Some of those wounds we've sustained have been self-inflicted, and we need to be honest about that. But to distinguish ourselves from other groups, this is going to require two things. One, a means by which we are able to identify one another, to identify that, hey, you're somebody whose lineage goes back to the killing fields of the American South. And two, we got to stop being bashful about pointing that out. We got to stop being bashful about asking about that. We got to make clear these are a group of people who want to make sure we know who we're talking to. Now, this is going to make some people, especially those tethers, very, very uncomfortable. They've had a free ride at our expense. They've eaten good at our expense, pretending to be us, trying to ride on the coattails of our history that they were not a part of. But when we make it very clear, we're asking to see your papers, please. Identification, please. Making it very clear that, well, we're trying to make sure that we prop up our own here. Since everybody else has made it their mission to knock us down, we're going to prop up our own. When they see that, they're not going to be grateful for it. All of a sudden, we're going to start hearing some talk that we've never heard before. Oh, brother, it can't be like that. Oh, you're going to have a whole lot of them who are saying we're all black people. All of a sudden, we're all going to be black all of a sudden. All of a sudden, ain't going to be none of this, well, we're better than you kind of talk. Well, they can save it. They want to put forward the idea that they're better than us. Well, that's good. Now they can prove it. Except they will not have our support. They will not have our money, and they won't have our numbers with which to do it. They'll have to try to play the game of we're better than you all by themselves. And they know that that won't last very long. Part of white supremacy was to imprint upon us the idea, the identity that we are some long-suffering messianic people of a sort. Our job is to suffer from Massa and be morally higher than him while we suffer under his boot. It was our job to redeem Massa from his vile and wicked ways. That was the identity white supremacy gave to us to make us feel better about our enslavement. We were storing up riches in heaven by allowing Massa to oppress us and abuse us because that was the price paid so that Massa could see the light. And then these other groups, particularly from Africa and the Caribbean, they came over here, and rather than join with us, they decided to jump on our backs right alongside Massa. They decided, hey, if you guys are willing to suffer for Massa, you can go ahead and suffer for us too. Well, we're making it very clear we're not trying to save anyone else. We're not trying to redeem anyone else. Whether it's Massa or whether it happens to be these black folks around the world, they know what the hell's been going on. And rather than take on the enemy, they've decided instead that they would spit in our faces. They look at us, and as far as they're concerned, regardless of their own lower status in the world, or certainly their own lower place in the world, they look at us and try to portray us as being some sort of group of people who are stateless, and these people have no roots. And our answer to that? We may well be stateless for now, but at least we're not gutless. Can Pan Africanism ever be resurrected? Well, we're not worrying about that. We don't spend any time thinking about that. And if the rest of the African world decides that maybe one day they want to get their act together and get their heads on straight, that's fine. But we're not sitting around waiting for that day. Because while the rest of the black world clearly has not learned anything from the tragic Holocaust, plural, that we have suffered the last 500 years, those of us here in the hells of North America, we learned the lesson. And the lesson took. Black media only exists because of you. If you value the kind of uncompromising commentary and insight that we offer, you can hit us up on Cash App. The link is in the description. Good day, and be one.